Son Peygamber.
There is something which I read once upon a time. It says that you get 4 kinds of teachers. The first teacher, he speaks to his student. He is a weak teacher. The second teacher, he explains to his student. So he is still mediocre, not the best that there is. The third teacher, he demonstrates. He is considered a good teacher, but he's still not a real teacher. The real teacher inspires. So what happens with the real teacher is that the student sees him doing what he does, speaking, explaining, demonstrating, but living what he teaches as well at the same time. He sees within him a living example, and then that student says to himself that I want to be like that person, I want to imitate him. That is what our Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam was. He spoke as well, and he explained and he demonstrated, but most importantly he was the embodiment of everything that he taught. So therefore Sayyida Aisha radiyallahu anha could say that kana khuluquhu al-Quran. He taught the Quran, and therefore his entire life became the Quran. And therefore he could generate a generation of men that would want to follow him in every footstep of his way, wherever he went, in whichever way he did things, with the character that he did it with. So he created a generation of men about whom Allah Ta'ala himself could say that radiyallahu anhum wa radu an. And that generation carried Islam to the 4 corners of the world and made it a religion and a civilization that lighted the way for the world when Europe was in the Dark Ages, and preserved the knowledge of the entire world, so that the world today is benefiting from that. Here we have a man who perhaps did not come to initiate an industrial revolution, no technology as such, but what he did, he made humanity realize the value of humanity and the purpose of humanity. Once humanity realizes its own intrinsic value, and they realize their purpose, where they come from and where they are headed to, then they know exactly how to go about living in this world, to use this world as a stepping stone to the next. So you do not get the individuality that we find in Western existentialism today, that only I am important. No, you live on account of others. You live, do the best that you can so that others could benefit from it. You want to do that first? That's a comment on him as a teacher. In Islam we find the combination of 2 sources of knowledge. There is the aql, the rational intellect, combined with wahi, with revelation. Both these 2 together, both intellect and revelation. The combination of these 2 give us epistemology in Islam, our theory of knowledge in Islam. Our Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam lived as a Nabi for 23 years, a life of 63 years, and then he left this world. But he left a tradition in place, and that tradition was developed after him by his companions, thereafter by their followers, and thus it has continued. This religion must last to the end of time, because every member of the Ummah of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam is expected to live according to the dictates of Quran, of Sunnah, of Sharia. But the longevity and the life of this deen, and the extent to which those people who must live according to it, the extent to which they will have access to it, will be determined by, are there men present amongst them who will be able to impart to them, be able to tell them that this is what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, this is what he did, this is how we are supposed to live. Preservation of sources is what it comes down to. Preservation of Quran, preservation of Hadith, preservation of our entire legacy, our Turath. The preservation of it can only take place if there are going to be men who will dedicate themselves to the task that this is my work in life, to take the legacy of Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and preserve it. It comes down to the original idea of revelation, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was sent for 3 purposes. يَتْلُو عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتِهِ وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةِ. You take this ayah on the one hand and you compare it to the hadith that says يَحْمِلُ هَذَا الْعِلْمَ مِنْ كُلِّ خَلَفٍ عُدُولُهُ. of every khalaf, every successive generation, there will be udul, there will be men of adala, men of integrity who will carry this knowledge further. Al-ulama warathul anbiya. The anbiya came with a purpose, the ulama are the ones who will continue it further. So the life of this deen and the preservation of its sources depends upon men who will carry it forth. Everyone cannot go into any one particular field. In the earliest age, jihad was one of the most important things to preserve deen at the time. But even there, too, مَا كَانَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ لِيَنْفِرُوا كَافَّةً. Some will have to make تفقه في الدين لِيَتَفَقَّهُوا فِي الدِّينِ وَلِيُنذِرُوا قَوْمَهُم إِذَا رَجَعُوا إِلَيْهِمْ. So from the outset, there was the idea of separation of duty, that some will have to devote themselves to the preservation of deen, others will protect deen and protect society in other ways. Others will take part in industry, others will partake in trade, others will partake in military activity. But there has to be one group that preserves deen. That is where the ulama will come in. And in 1,000 years, 1,400 years of history, there have always been those men in every society. I think in the case of your own society here, and this is the matter which interests me, which I'm asking a lot of questions about, after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, there was an entire institution of a class practically in society of ulama, and there was an attempt to remove them entirely from the scene. I think the present circumstances shows today that it cannot simply be wiped off the map. There will still be those who will, whether secretly, whether privately, devote themselves to study, to maintain the lifeblood of deen and the flame of Islam alive, so that the next generation come, there are those who will be able to pass it along to them. Essentially, it's the preservation of the legacy of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in every society. Therefore, there will always have to be such men. Before we come to the times, let's go back to the time of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself. If we look what happened after Badr, when several of the kuffar of Makkah were taken prisoners, they could free themselves by paying ransom. Those who couldn't pay ransom had to teach the children of Medina reading and writing, which means Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam attached importance to education for the children from that time already. He used to have his regular interaction with the Sahaba, the males amongst the Sahaba, that was in place. And the females also asked, what about us? Why are we being left aside? So he made one day in the week specifically for them. The reason why he did it, education for a female is as important as education for a male. In some ways even more important. Ahmad Shawqi, the poet, says that, what does he say now? Subhanallah, the line of poetry is escaping me now. وَالْأُمُّ مَدْرَسَةٌ إِذَا أَعْدَدْتَهَا أَعْدَدْتَ شَعْبًا طَيِّبَ الْأَعْرَاقِ. The mother is the madrasa. The child learns its first deen at the knees of its mother. If that mother is properly prepared, if she knows her deen well, she doesn't have to be a great muhadditha, faqihah, allama, but she needs to know the basics of her deen in order to impart it to that child. Then if she knows her deen well, she can impart it. That's the first school that the child will go. Further, beyond that, have women in the time of Sahaba, Tabi'een. I think the outstanding example is that of Sayyidah Aisha radiyallahu anha. The wives of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had a role to play in more than one ways. وَاذْكُرْنَ مَا يُتْلَى فِي بُيُوتِكُنَّ مِنْ آيَاتِ اللَّهِ وَالْحِكْمَةِ was said for a specific reason. They were the closest to Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam in his own private life. So, مَا يُتْلَى فِي بُيُوتِكُنَّ مِنْ آيَاتِ اللَّهِ وَالْحِكْمَةِ, and hikmah has generally been interpreted by the ulama as meaning the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They were important in the transmission thereof. Outstanding amongst them was Sayyidah Aisha radiyallahu anha, who could afterwards even correct the mistakes of certain other Sahaba radiyallahu anhum. That was Aisha radiyallahu anha. She herself had students, amongst whom was Aisha bint Talha, who in her, she was one of her students. Amra bint Abdul Rahman ibn Auf was one that other tabi'een, when Umar ibn Abdul Aziz instructed Zuhri to start writing down hadith, he told him to go in Medina to two students of Aisha. One was Urwa ibn Zubayr and one was Amra bint Abdul Rahman ibn Auf. So again, knowledge once transmitted via both strands. It is always going to be more balanced to the side of men, because men are more active in social society than females. But females not only have a right to know their deen, the right to pursue ilm, but they have a duty to do so, more so at the introductory primary level for their own particular children. This idea of females participating in the transmission of knowledge, throughout our history it's been that way. We find, for example, the transmission of Sahih al-Bukhari. There's a famous muhadditha of the city of Marw in Khurasan, Karima al-Marwaziyya. She transmits Sahih al-Bukhari. Khatib Baghdadi heard Sahih al-Bukhari from her in Makkah. She traveled with her father. Wherever she went, Kiram was her kunya. Wherever she went, she traveled with her father in search of knowledge. Afterwards, great muhaddithin would come and learn at her feet. Similarly, Shuhda al-Katiba. She was not only a very excellent calligrapher, but at the same time she was a great faqihah as well. I would look at the grandmother of Imam Rafi'i in Qazwin. She was the mufti of the females of that particular area. And that's one way in which women participated. There is another way as well. They played the supporting role for those who were involved in the participation, in the preservation and the transmission of knowledge. Starting with Sayyidah Khadija radiallahu anha. The da'wah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was supported by the assistance of Khadija radiallahu anha. Then we go a few years down the line. The oldest Islamic university in the world, before Al-Azhar even, was Qarawiyyin in Fas. It was a woman, Fatima al-Fihriya, who established that university, and is still going up to the present day. In Makkah, a few hundred years ago, there was barely any proper institute. Knowledge was being imparted in the haram in various different halaqat, but there was no proper institution of knowledge. Something like 150 years ago, a woman comes forward, Begum Saulat, and she provides the money with which Maulana Rahmatullah Keran starts the Madrasa Saulatiyya, and it's running up to the present day. So females have participated in practical transmission on the one hand, and in a supporting role for the transmission on the other. In both cases, whether they involved in the practical transmission, direct transmission, or playing a supporting role for the transmission of ilm, there was one in which all women participated, and that was the rearing of their children as good Muslims who are aware of their deen as well. Just one story I want to tell in this regard. The founder of the institute where I studied, Darul Uloom Deoband, the founder was Maulana Muhammad Qasim Nanotwi. So after he completed his studies, then he got married. He got married to the daughter of a rich man, and the father gave her a lot of jewelry. So one day he came home and the jewelry was all there. So he tells his wife, at that time the Ottoman Empire was fighting the Crimean War in Europe, and many of the Muslims of India were giving financial assistance, sending money from India to the Ottoman Empire to fight that war. The Ottoman Empire eventually sent, in recognition of the assistance of the Indian Muslims, they sent a piece of cloth upon which the Jubba of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was in Topkapi once upon a time. They sent it as a gift. Not the Jubba itself, but the cloth on which it was. It is still kept in Darul Uloom Deoband. But anyway, the story is that he told his wife, your father has given you all this jewelry, let's give sadaqah towards the war effort of the Ottoman Empire. So she gave it away. Then her father came to visit one day, asked, where's all the jewelry that I gave you? She says, well, we gave it away. His father said, I'll give you more. So he gave her more. Maulana Muhammad Qasim comes home and he sees more jewelry. So he says, let's give it again. Anyway, then the third time when he came home and he saw she's got jewelry on again. So he took her hands and he says, these bangles, it's like I see snakes around your arm. And his wife said at that moment, she almost felt really that these were snakes. It wasn't gold and silver, it was snakes around the arm. And she took it off and she says, take it away, give it away for that towards the Khilaf Uthmaniyya, we don't want it. The important point that happened there was, this was a rich man's daughter. He had taken the love of dunya out of her heart. Then he started teaching her. The husband started teaching the wife. What he taught her can be gauged from the fact that his grandson, Muhammad Qasim Nanotwi, his grandson was Qari Tayyib. Qari Tayyib was the principal of Darul Uloom Deoband for over 50 years, and my father's teacher and Maulana's teacher as well. When he grew up as a student, in the pre-final year they read Mishkat al-Masabih. He did not study Mishkat al-Masabih in the madrasa. He studied it under his grandmother. He didn't go to class. So this was a grandmother. She could teach her own grandson one of the higher books of hadith. That was when the love of dunya came out of the heart And the husband told the wife she was involved in the transmission of ilm in that way. I think every parent wishes just the best for his child. So some parents will try and make sure that the child gets as good as possible in education. He must be a doctor, or he must be a lawyer, or an engineer, or whatever it might be. He must have the best. As Muslims, we look at both sides. Not just dunya, we look at the akhirah as well. And when we try and provide for our children in future, we give them education. If the person is a Muslim true at heart, he will try and provide for both the dunya and the akhirah. It won't just be that everyone was just going to a certain line. No, there will have to be those as well who will take charge and preserve deen. Now for that, the more worldly pursuits, I will call it perhaps, taking one of these secular pursuits, there are rewards attached to it. There are rewards. The child will earn well, or he'll have a high position in society. All of those things are there. For taking up the preservation of Allah's deen, there might not be all of those other trappings and all of those other attractions, but Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam themselves provide for them. They say that a person who sends his child to do what? Hifz of the Quran, what happens? The child becomes an interceder for so many of his family. It's not just good for himself. 10 of his family, kullum qad istawjabu an-nar. All of them can go to. Then on the day of Qiyamah, who will be, a capping ceremony, Sahibul Quran. When a person graduates, then you come to the graduation ceremony and they place a cap on their head and everyone is there and they clap hands. The graduation ceremony for the person who takes up the preservation of Allah's deen on the day of Qiyamah, his parents will be honored. Imam Shatibi says in the Qasida that Hani an Mari an Walidaka alayhima malabisu anwarim min at-taji wal hula fama dhannukum bin najli inda jazaihi. Everyone gets honored in that. So honor and respect in this world as well as the hereafter, not only the child shares in it, even the parents will share in it. Once upon a time it was such that if the person is a great alim, then he is automatically, he can become a Shaykhul Islam, in other words, he has position in dunya as well. Now it's no longer like that. So if a person is a great alim, he's not necessarily going to be able to rise to the level of the minister or the wazir or the Shaykhul Islam or the mufti or something like that. So now our sincerity is going to be tested to a greater extent than once upon a time. And the person that opts to go into studies for deen, he might not have all of the same status and honor and respect in this dunya, but Allah Ta'ala will raise him to such levels in the akhirah. And not only him, together with him, his parents, together with them, their families as well. All of them get honored in the process. And such honor, most certainly in the akhirah will be there. But even in this dunya, there will be so much of it as well. So someone who looks after Allah Ta'ala's deen and preserves Allah Ta'ala's deen in this dunya, Allah will look after him in the akhirah, but even in this dunya, Allah Ta'ala will see to his needs.